Zayden Jennings had conquered boardrooms, outmaneuvered rivals, and built an empire worth billions, but at that moment, he was lying flat on his back in the middle of a shopping mall floor, blinking up at the fluorescent lights in absolute disbelief. He had slipped. A billionaire. A man who prided himself on control, precision, and power undone by a slick patch of water near the food court. A soft laugh broke through his stunned haze. Wow, that was quite the fall. Zayden turned his head, locking eyes with the woman crouched beside him. She was stunning in an understated way, dark waves of hair cascading over her shoulder, eyes filled with concern and amusement. She wasn't dressed in designer labels or dripping with diamonds, just a simple sweater and jeans, but there was something about her presence that was undeniable. She extended her hand. Need a hand up. For the first time in years, Zayden found himself speechless. It wasn't because he was in pain, though his pride had taken a hit, but because no one spoke to him like this. No hesitation, no deference. Just a woman offering to help a man who had just embarrassed himself spectacularly. He took her hand. Her grip was firm, steady, warm. Once he was back on his feet, she let go and dusted off her hands, looking up at him with an amused tilt of her head. You okay? That was a pretty dramatic fall. Zayden straightened his suit jacket, regaining some semblance of dignity. I've survived worse. I'm sure, she teased, crossing her arms, but maybe watch out for wet floors next time. He felt his lips twitch. I'll keep that in mind. She glanced at his shoulder briefly, as if checking for any injuries before giving him a small nod of approval. Good, well, take care. And just like that, she turned to walk away. Zayden had spent years in high-stakes negotiations, manipulating markets and ensuring people hung onto his every word. But something about her walking away so easily made his stomach twist in a way he didn't understand. Wait, she paused, glancing back over her shoulder. What's your name? A small, knowing smile crossed her lips. Vera Monroe, Vera. Before he could say anything else, she disappeared into the crowd, leaving Zayden standing in the middle of the mall, surrounded by people who had no idea that the most powerful man in the city had just been utterly, completely thrown off balance by a woman who had no idea who he was. And for the first time in years, Zayden Jennings found himself intrigued. Zayden wasn't the type to let things go. If he wanted something, he got it. And right now, he wanted to see Vera Monroe again. After an hour of discreet inquiries, he finally found her working at a small bookstore tucked between a jewelry shop and a cafe. Through the glass window, he watched her for a moment, completely unaware of the way his pulse quickened. She was shelving books, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear, completely lost in whatever world she was handling. Zayden pushed open the door. The bell above jingled softly. Vera looked up and her brows lifted in recognition. Wow. You're persistent. He stepped closer, sliding his hands into his pockets. I like to finish what I start, she arched an eyebrow. And what exactly did you start, falling dramatically in a mall? He chuckled, shaking his head. No. I meant meeting you. She studied him for a moment, as if trying to figure out why a man in a tailored suit was standing in her quiet bookstore. You don't seem like the bookstore type. You don't seem like the type to rescue billionaires in distress. Her lips parted slightly, startled. Billionaire, he nodded. Zayden Jennings. There it was, that brief flicker of recognition, but instead of the usual awe or intimidation, she just exhaled, shaking her head. Figures, you've got that whole mysterious, intimidating thing going on, he smirked. Intimidating? A little. For some reason, the fact that she wasn't swooning or scrambling to impress him made him like her even more. Let me take you to dinner. Vera blinked. Excuse me? I want to thank you for helping me earlier. She let out a soft laugh. I think you'll survive without repaying me. Probably, he admitted, but I'd still like to. She hesitated, biting her lip. I don't really do the whole billionaire scene. He tilted his head. What does that mean? You know, fancy restaurants, private jets, expensive gifts, she said, waving a hand. I'm not interested in all that, he smiled, intrigued. Then let's keep it simple, just dinner. Vera studied him for a long moment, as if trying to decipher his motives. Finally, she sighed. Fine, but only if I get to pick the place. He gestured toward her. Deal. She grabbed her coat and stepped around the counter. Hope you're ready for greasy burgers and milkshakes, Jennings, Zayden chuckled. I think I can manage. As they walked out of the bookstore together, Zayden couldn't help but feel something unfamiliar stirring inside him. For the first time in a long, long time, he was excited about something that had nothing to do with business or power. And it was all because of Vera Monroe. The small diner Vera had chosen was bathed in the warm glow of neon lights, the scent of sizzling burgers and fresh-cut fries filling the air. It was a stark contrast to the exclusive restaurants Zayden usually frequented. No velvet ropes, no maitre d', no hushed conversations over candlelit tables. Just the hum of casual chatter, the occasional clatter of dishes, and the distant tune of an old jukebox. Vera slid into a booth by the window, and Zayden followed, settling across from her. She glanced at him, amusement flickering in her eyes as she took in his crisp suit against the backdrop of checkered floors and vinyl seats. You look a little out of place, she teased, picking up a laminated menu. Zayden leaned back, watching her with interest. I can adapt, she gave him a knowing look. We'll see about that. A waitress approached, a notepad in hand, her gaze flickering between them. What can I get you too? Vera didn't hesitate. Double cheeseburger, extra pickles, side of fries, and a chocolate milkshake. Zayden raised an eyebrow. That's quite the order, she shrugged. Go big or go home. The waitress turned to him expectantly. I'll have the same, he said without missing a beat. Vera's lips curved slightly. I don't think billionaires usually drown their stress in chocolate milkshakes. He met her gaze with interest. I suppose I'm not a typical billionaire. She studied him for a moment before setting the menu aside. So what is it you actually do? He folded his hands on the table. I run Jennings International, investments, real estate, technology, a little bit of everything. She nodded thoughtfully. Sounds exhausting. He let out a low chuckle. It has its moments. Their food arrived quickly, the milkshakes placed in front of them with striped straws sticking out. Vera immediately took a sip, closing her eyes for a brief second as if savoring the taste. Perfect, she declared. Zayden followed suit, taking a tentative sip. The richness of the chocolate was a stark contrast to the aged whiskey and imported wines he was accustomed to. It was simple, unpretentious, and oddly satisfying. Vera took a bite of her burger, then pointed at him with a fry. So tell me something about you that isn't tied to business. He considered her request, realizing how rarely he talked about anything outside of his company. I like sailing, she tilted her head. Like the whole fancy yacht lifestyle, he shook his head. No, just being out on the water. No meetings, no emails, no distractions. She nodded approvingly. That's actually kind of nice. He took a bite of his burger, studying her carefully. What about you? She wiped her hands on a napkin. Nothing nearly as glamorous. I love restoring old books. His curiosity piqued. Restoring them, she brightened slightly. Yeah, fixing broken spines, repairing torn pages, preserving history. There's something rewarding about bringing something back to life. He could see the passion in her eyes, the way she spoke with quiet reverence. It was refreshing. You must love working at the bookstore then, he observed. She hesitated for a moment before nodding. Yeah, it's not exactly lucrative, but it makes me happy. There was something in her voice, a quiet acceptance, but also a trace of something unspoken. Zayden leaned forward slightly. What did you want to do before the bookstore? Her fingers toyed with the edge of her napkin. I wanted to open my own restoration studio. A place where people could bring in their old books and I could help preserve them. He saw it then, the dream that had been pushed aside, perhaps by circumstance, perhaps by doubt. Why didn't you? She let out a soft breath. Life got in the way. He didn't press, sensing there was more to the story than she was willing to share just yet. Instead, he let the moment settle between them, the weight of unspoken things lingering in the air. Vera suddenly straightened. Okay, serious question. He arched an eyebrow. Go on. If you could only eat burgers or drink milkshakes for the rest of your life, which one would you choose? A slow smile tugged at his lips. That's an impossible choice. She leaned forward, elbows on the table. No escaping it, you have to pick. He pretended to consider it. Milkshakes. She shook her head dramatically. Wrong answer. He laughed, a genuine, unrestrained sound that surprised even him. For years, his world had been filled with calculated conversations, strategic alliances, and the relentless pursuit of success. But here, in a small diner with a woman who had no interest in his wealth or power, he felt something he hadn't in a long time: ease, and he wasn't ready to let it go. As they stepped out of the diner, the night air was crisp, the city lights twinkling in the distance. Vera turned to him, hands tucked into her pockets. "Thanks for dinner, I had fun." He found himself reluctant to end the night. "Let me drive you home." She hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "All right." They walked to his car, a sleek black vehicle that clearly didn't belong in this part of town. Vera let out a low whistle. "Yeah, this definitely screams billionaire." He opened the passenger door for her. "Get in before you critique it too much." She slid inside, shaking her head with amusement. As he drove, the city streets blurred past, but his attention kept drifting toward her. When they reached her apartment, she unbuckled her seatbelt but didn't immediately step out. This was nice, she admitted softly. He met her gaze. "I'd like to see you again," she exhaled, as if weighing something unseen. Zayden, he waited, sensing the hesitation in her voice. She finally shook her head with a small smile. "Good night, Jennings." Before he could respond, she stepped out and disappeared into the building. Zayden sat there for a long moment, staring at the empty seat beside him. Something about Vera Monroe had unsettled the very foundation of the world he had built. And for the first time in his life, he wasn't in control. Zayden wasn't a man accustomed to hesitation, yet Vera Monroe had left him sitting in his car, staring at the entrance of her building long after she had disappeared inside. He had expected a simple answer, yes or no. Instead, she had left him with an ellipsis, an unspoken thought hanging between them. It was infuriating and fascinating. The next day, Zayden found himself pacing his office, his mind only half focused on the reports his assistant had placed on his desk. His usual schedule meetings, decisions, numbers felt like background noise. He had spent years perfecting the art of control, yet Vera had managed to disrupt his world without even trying. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. His assistant, Nalan, stepped in. "Sir, your meeting with the board is in 5 minutes." Zayden barely acknowledged him. "Reschedule it." Nalan blinked. "Sir." Zayden was already grabbing his coat. "Something more important has come up." Vera was shelving a stack of books when the chime above the bookstore's door rang. She glanced up, expecting a customer, but instead she found Zayden standing there, hands in his pockets, eyes locked on her. "You again," she exhaled, shaking her head. "You do realize there are other bookstores in the city, right?" He stepped closer, his presence commanding even in the small space. "I didn't come for the books." She stacked the last novel on the shelf. "Zayden, I meant what I said last night." I don't believe you," he interrupted smoothly. She turned, arms crossed. "Excuse me. You wanted to say yes." His tone was calm, but there was an intensity in his gaze that made her pulse quicken. She let out a quiet laugh, though there was no humor in it. "You're awfully sure of yourself." He took another step forward. "Not about many things, but this." He tilted his head slightly. "I know when someone is running from something." Her jaw tightened. "I'm not running." "Then say no." His voice was low, steady. "Look me in the eye and tell me you don't want to see me again." She opened her mouth, but the words wouldn't come. Zayden's lips curved just slightly. "Exactly." Vera exhaled sharply, running a hand through her hair. "You're infuriating, and you're avoiding the truth." She sighed, glancing toward the counter as if it held the answer she was searching for. "Zayden, I like my life the way it is." He nodded, considering her words. "And you think I'll ruin it?" She met his gaze, and for the first time there was something raw there. "I think you'll change it." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then quietly he said, "Maybe change isn't a bad thing." She swallowed, as if warring with herself. "I don't know how to do this." He softened just slightly. "Then let me make it easy." She hesitated. "How? Dinner, tonight." He paused, then added, "And this time I pick the place." She narrowed her eyes. "If this involves a yacht, I swear," he chuckled. "No yachts." She studied him, searching for some kind of hidden motive, but all she found was quiet certainty. Finally, she sighed. "Fine." His expression didn't change, but there was something victorious in his posture. "I'll pick you up at 7. And just like that, He turned and walked out, leaving Vera standing there, heart pounding, wondering what exactly she had just gotten herself into. At exactly 7, a sleek black car pulled up outside Vera's building. She hesitated for only a moment before stepping outside, where Zayden was already waiting, holding the door open for her. "You're punctual," she noted as she slid into the passenger seat. He smirked. "I'm many things." The drive was quiet, except for the soft hum of the city around them. When they finally pulled up to their destination, Vera blinked in surprise. A rooftop, lit with hundreds of tiny string lights, a single table set for 2 in the center, overlooking the city skyline. She turned to him, eyebrows raised. "So much for keeping it simple," he shrugged. "You said no yachts." She let out a breathless laugh. "You really don't do anything halfway, do you?" He met her gaze. "Not when it matters." They sat at the table, the city stretching out beneath them, a soft breeze carrying the scent of fresh basil and grilled steak. Vera picked up her glass of wine, swirling it absent-mindedly. "Why me?" Zayden set his silverware down, meeting her gaze. "What do you mean?" She gestured vaguely. "You could be anywhere, with anyone, and yet you're here with me. Why?" He leaned forward slightly. "Because you don't care who I am," she blinked. "I'm used to people knowing my name before I even introduce myself," he continued. "Used to people wanting something from me, but you didn't even hesitate to call me out. You treat me like a person, not a billionaire." Vera swallowed, looking down at her plate. "I don't know how to be part of your world." He was quiet for a moment before he said, "Then don't be." She looked up. "You don't have to fit into my world, Vera. I want to fit into yours." Something in her chest tightened. For the first time since meeting him, she realized she wasn't just resisting him, she was resisting what he made her feel, and that terrified her. Zayden reached across the table, fingers brushing against hers. "Just give this a chance." Vera took a breath, steadying herself. Then, hesitantly, she curled her fingers around his, and for the first time, she let herself wonder maybe, just maybe, falling wasn't always a bad thing. Zayden had always believed that control was the key to life. Every decision, every move, every calculated risk had led him to where he was a man who commanded power and respect in every room he entered. But sitting across from Vera, watching her fingers lightly trace the rim of her wine glass as the city lights reflected in her eyes, he realized control had nothing to do with love. It was chaos, beautiful, consuming, and entirely beyond his grasp. "I don't think I've ever had a meal this extravagant," she admitted, leaning back in her chair. "It feels like something out of a movie." He studied her, the way the candlelight softened her features. "I wanted to give you something special." She tilted her head, amusement flickering across her face. "You could have just taken me to another diner." Zayden exhaled a quiet laugh. "Would that have been enough?" She tapped a finger against the table, considering. "Probably." He shook his head, leaning forward slightly. "You deserve more than probably." The words landed between them, heavier than he expected. Vera's expression shifted, something uncertain flickering in her eyes before she glanced down at her plate. "Zayden." He refused to let her retreat into uncertainty. "Tell me what you're thinking." She hesitated before answering, her voice quieter than before. "I was fine before I met you." His jaw tightened. "And now?" "I don't know," she admitted. "You complicate things." Zayden reached across the table, brushing his fingers over hers. "The best things in life are complicated." She looked up then, something unreadable in her gaze. "I don't want to be a temporary distraction for you." His grip on her hand tightened slightly. "You're not." She studied him, searching for dishonesty, but he saw the moment she realized there was none to find. Seconds stretched between them, and then, finally, she exhaled the breath she'd been holding. "Okay." A single word, but it changed everything. Zayden wasn't a man prone to impulsive decisions, but in that moment, he knew he would do whatever it took to keep her in his life. The following weeks passed in a blur of stolen moments and quiet confessions. Zayden had never spent so much time outside the confines of his office, yet somehow, Vera had become the exception to every rule he had ever set for himself. They spent evenings in her bookstore, where he would pretend to read while secretly watching the way she handled old books with reverence. They wandered through street markets, where she teased him for looking entirely out of place among the chaos. And they found solace in shared silences, where no words were needed to understand what was growing between them. But with every moment of happiness, there was an undercurrent of something unspoken. Zayden could feel it in the way Vera would pull back just slightly when things became too real, in the way she hesitated, before answering when he asked about her past. He didn't push. He had learned early on that Vera wasn't someone who could be rushed. But one evening, as they sat on the rooftop where their first real date had taken place, he finally decided he couldn't keep ignoring it. "You're holding something back," he said, his voice steady. Vera looked at him, startled. "What?" "You keep putting up walls," he continued. "And I've let you because I know you need time, but I need to know, are you planning to keep me on the other side of them forever?" She swallowed, turning her gaze toward the skyline. "It's not about you." "Then what is it about?" Silence stretched between them before she finally spoke. "I've spent so much of my life being careful," she admitted, "making safe choices, avoiding risks, and then you showed up and suddenly nothing feels safe anymore." Zayden's chest tightened. "You think I'm a risk?" She let out a quiet laugh, but it held no humor. "You're the biggest one I've ever taken." He took her hands in his grip firm. "Then let me prove to you that I'm worth it." She met his gaze, something vulnerable in her expression. "And what happens when this world of yours pulls you back in? When work takes over, when you realize I don't fit into it the way everyone else does?" Zayden didn't hesitate. "I don't want someone who fits into my world, Vera. I want someone who makes me want to change it." Her lips parted slightly, as if she hadn't expected that answer. He continued, his voice unwavering. "I've spent my whole life building an empire, but none of it has ever made me feel the way you do." She blinked, her throat working as if she was trying to find the right words, and then, suddenly, she didn't need them. Because Vera moved forward, closing the space between them, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that held every unspoken fear, every unvoiced hope. Zayden deepened it, his hands tangling in her hair, his heart pounding in a way he hadn't felt in years. When they finally pulled apart, her forehead rested against his. "You're impossible," she whispered. He smiled, his breath mingling with hers. "And you're unforgettable." Her fingers tightened against his shirt. "I'm scared, Zayden." He pressed a kiss against her temple. "Then let me be the one thing you don't have to be afraid of." And for the first time since meeting him, Vera let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, falling wasn't the worst thing in the world. Zayden had never been one to second-guess himself. But as he stood outside Vera's bookstore at closing time, he felt something unfamiliar settle in his chest, a quiet sort of anticipation that made him restless. She hadn't seen him yet, focused on locking up for the night, her fingers moving deftly over the keyring. The streetlights cast a soft glow over her face, highlighting the quiet determination in her expression. He stepped forward, his presence catching her attention. "You're late," she noted, tucking the keys into her coat pocket. "I wanted to give you time to miss me." A chuckle escaped her, light and effortless. "Confident, aren't you?" "I prefer determined." She shook her head, but there was warmth in her gaze. They started walking, no destination in mind, just the quiet rhythm of their steps against the pavement. The streets were quieter at this hour, the usual rush of the city settling into something softer. Zayden glanced at her, taking in the way the wind played with the loose strands of her hair. "I have something for you." "You always have something," she teased. "This is different." He reached into his coat, pulling out a small, leather-bound book. Her steps slowed as he handed it to her. The cover was worn but sturdy, the edges slightly frayed with age. As she traced a finger over the embossed lettering, her breath hitched. "This is," she swallowed, her voice quiet, "this book is over 100 years old." "I know," he said. "I found it at a private auction and thought you might want to restore it." She carefully opened it, her fingertips featherlight against the delicate pages. "You didn't have to do this." "I wanted to." Her throat worked as she closed the book, holding it close to her chest. "No one's ever given me something like this before." He studied her, sensing the weight of her words. "Then they haven't been paying attention," she exhaled, a slow, steady breath. "I don't know what to do with you, Zayden." "Keep me," he said simply. She let out a quiet laugh, but there was emotion behind it. "You make it sound so easy." "It is." She looked up at him then, something shifting in her expression. "For you, maybe." "Then let me make it easy for you," he said, his voice softer now. "No expectations, no pressure, just us." She held his gaze, the book still clutched tight in her hands. "You make it impossible to walk away." "Good," he murmured. For a moment they just stood there, the city moving around them, but the world had shrunk to just the two of them. Then, without another word, she reached for his hand, threading her fingers through his. And for the first time, she didn't pull away. Days passed, then weeks, and somehow, without either of them defining it, they had become something unshakable. Zayden found himself in places he had never imagined, helping Vera organize stacks of books, sitting on the floor of her apartment as she carefully restored antique pages, wandering through street fairs, where she dragged him to booths filled with handmade trinkets. And Vera found herself in places she never thought she'd belong, standing in the corner of a high-rise office as Zayden argued with board members, sitting beside him at charity galas, where he introduced her without hesitation, watching him navigate a world so far from her own with effortless precision. But no matter where they were, they always found their way back to each other. One evening, as she leaned against his kitchen counter, watching him pour 2 glasses of wine, she asked the question that had been lingering in the back of her mind for weeks. "Why me?" He set the bottle down, turning to face her fully. "Why not you?" she exhaled, shaking her head. "You could have anyone." "I don't want anyone," he said, stepping closer. "I want you." Her fingers curled around the stem of her glass. "I don't understand why." He reached for her hand, his touch steady. "Because you see me. Not the billionaire, not the businessman, just me." She swallowed, her voice barely above a whisper. "And that's enough." He brushed his thumb over her knuckles. "More than enough." She let out a soft, unsteady breath. "You scare me, Zayden. Then let me be the one thing you don't have to be afraid of." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she set her glass aside and stepped closer, pressing her forehead against his chest. His arms came around her, holding her as if he had no intention of letting go. And in that moment, she realized she didn't want him to. It wasn't perfect. There were moments of doubt, of hesitation, of wondering if they were too different. But every time those thoughts crept in, Zayden pulled her back. And when he finally told her he loved her, it wasn't in some grand, orchestrated moment. It was late, well past midnight, as they sat on the floor of her bookstore, surrounded by stacks of books she had been sorting. She was exhausted, her head resting against his shoulder, her fingers lazily tracing circles against his palm. And then, just like that, he said it. "I love you." She froze, her breath catching. He didn't take it back, didn't soften the words. He just let them settle between them, waiting. Slowly, she lifted her head, searching his face. "You do? With everything I have." Her lips parted, but no words came, so instead she kissed him. It wasn't rushed, wasn't desperate. It was deliberate, filled with the quiet certainty that had been growing between them all along. When she finally pulled back, she whispered the words against his lips. "I love you too." And just like that, the last of her fears melted away. Because for the first time in her life, Vera Monroe wasn't afraid of falling. Because she knew, without a doubt, that Zayden Jennings would always be there to catch her. Zayden had never been one to hesitate. When he wanted something, he pursued it with unwavering certainty. And now, as he stood on the balcony of his penthouse, looking out over the city, he knew exactly what he wanted. Vera. Not just in fleeting moments or stolen nights, not just as someone who drifted into his life and left when the world pulled them in different directions. He wanted permanence. He wanted forever. The realization settled deep in his chest, solid and immovable. The only question left was how to ask her. He turned from the cityscape and walked inside, his mind already working through the details. This wasn't a business deal he could negotiate, wasn't a calculated risk he could measure. This was something infinitely more important, and for the first time in his life, he found himself nervous. He needed to make this perfect. That evening, Zayden took Vera to the marina. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving streaks of deep purple and gold across the sky. The water reflected the last remnants of daylight, shimmering beneath the glow of dock lights. Vera glanced at him as they walked along the wooden planks, her fingers intertwined with his. "You're being suspiciously quiet," he exhaled, squeezing her hand slightly. "Just thinking." She laughed softly. "That's dangerous." Zayden led her toward a sleek sailboat, the deck illuminated by soft lanterns. He helped her step aboard before following, guiding her toward a cozy arrangement of cushions near the bow. A chilled bottle of wine and 2 glasses sat nearby, along with a blanket draped over the railing. She arched an eyebrow. "Are you trying to impress me?" He settled beside her, watching her face carefully. "Have I?" She tilted her head, amusement flickering in her eyes. "Maybe." The boat rocked gently with the current as they sat in comfortable silence, the city lights twinkling in the distance. Zayden reached for her hand again, tracing slow circles against her palm. "I never expected you." Vera blinked at him, caught off guard by the sudden shift in his tone. "What?" He turned slightly so he could look directly at her. "I never expected to meet someone who would make me question everything I thought I knew about my life." She swallowed, her fingers tightening around his. "I built everything around control," he continued, "around knowing exactly what came next, but you changed all of that." Her lips parted, but no words came. Zayden reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. He didn't open it immediately, just held it between them, waiting until she met his gaze. "I don't want to control this," he said. "I don't want to plan every outcome or calculate every risk. I just want you." Vera's breath hitched, her eyes darting between the box and his face. Zayden finally opened it, revealing a ring simple yet elegant, a single diamond set in a classic band. "I love you," he said. "And I want to spend the rest of my life proving it to you." Vera's eyes shimmered, her fingers trembling slightly as she lifted them to her lips. Zayden held steady, waiting, uncharacteristically vulnerable in the silence. Then, after what felt like an eternity, she let out a breathless laugh. "You're impossible," he arched a brow. "Is that a yes?" She nodded, emotion thick in her voice. "Yes." Relief flooded through him as he slid the ring onto her finger, his hands steady despite the rush of adrenaline. And then she was kissing him, her arms winding around his neck, her lips warm and fierce against his. The city faded away. The world shrank to just this moment, and for the first time in his life, Zayden knew without a doubt that he had made the right choice. Months later, the air was filled with the soft hum of conversation, the clinking of glasses, and the gentle rustle of fabric as guests moved across the grand ballroom. Vera stood near the towering windows, her wedding dress flowing around her as she gazed at the city lights. The night was clear, the stars scattered across the sky like diamonds. A warm hand slid around her waist, pulling her back against a familiar chest. Zayden pressed a kiss to her temple. "You disappeared," she smiled, leaning into him. "Just needed a moment." He turned her gently, tilting her chin up so he could see her face. "Regretting anything?" She laughed softly. "Not a single thing." His fingers traced the back of her hand where the wedding band now rested. "Good." They stood like that for a moment, the celebration continuing around them, but neither of them needing anything more than each other. Then quietly he whispered, "Come with me." She let him lead her through the side doors, onto a private terrace where the noise of the ballroom faded into the night. The city stretched out before them, the same city where they had met, where they had fallen in love, where everything had changed. Zayden turned to her, his expression softer than she had ever seen. "I meant what I said that night on the boat." Vera tilted her head. "Which part?" He smiled. "That I want to spend the rest of my life proving how much I love you." She reached up, brushing a hand against his jaw. "You already have." He pulled her closer, his lips hovering just above hers. "Then I guess I'll have to spend the rest of our lives making sure you never forget it." And as he kissed her slow, deep, and endlessly certain, Vera knew she never would. Because some love stories didn't need grand declarations or perfect timing. Some love stories just needed 2 people willing to take the risk. And theirs had been worth every single fall.